there used to be this character named Zig Ziglar. He died a few years ago. He was, I hate to say that he was a motivational speaker. I mean, he certainly was that, but he was a person with, I think, a lot of real wisdom. He talked a lot in the business world. Anyway, he used to do this thing in public speeches to his audience, public speaking engagements with his audience. And he would say, how many of you know that you could do something today that would completely and totally make your life worse? And, everybody would raise their hands, and he would say, so what you're saying is you have some agency over the way your life goes. Because what's also true, obviously, is that there are some things that you can do, maybe today, maybe right now, to make your life better. My microphone just fell off. How do you feel about that? Should I start the video over? I should just be Buddhisty about it and accept that it happened and not be thrown. So anyway, I like that. I always resonated with that idea. I like the idea of taking responsibility for your life. It's one of the things that led me away from the 12-step tradition, because today's video is going to be about addiction and recovery. I'm celebrating 18 years of sobriety, and I just didn't like the messages of powerlessness. I didn't like having to defer to a higher power somewhere out there. I always felt like really the only chance that you have is to take responsibility for your own behavior. I know that's not easy. I know that addiction is a kind of wild and mysterious power. But I just don't think there's any other choice. I've never fabricated a belief in God as part of my recovery. I've rejected the idea of powerlessness. I don't identify as an addict. I don't believe that in the disease of alcoholism. I've written about this a lot this week. If you want to go to Causes of Wellbeing, my website, or even my Facebook page, Pablo Das, I've written several articles this week which I've published about that. And I also like to say that I respect all paths, which is totally true. I don't think that what's right for me is right for somebody else or everybody else, but I do have a viewpoint. And one of the things that has really worked for me is exploring Buddhist practice and principle in recovery. I got sober not in the 12-step world, but in a Buddhist model for recovery. Later, I realized Buddhism's limitations as I got into a deeper understanding of trauma, which I think, which I know underlies my own addiction impulses, and which I strongly suspect, through my experience working in rehabs and for many years now one-on-one with people around addiction, I've heard their stories, I've read their paperwork, I've walked them through relapses into stable recovery. I know that that trauma is a underappreciated underlying dimension. And so anyway, what I wanted to focus on was what is valuable about Buddhism, because there's a lot that's valuable about Buddhism. And I want to focus on one particular teaching, which I think is foundational to all the rest of Buddhist teachings. And that's the teaching on conditionality. Really, conditionality is about cause and effect. It's the idea that nothing exists independent of its causes, that everything that can be known through awareness in the physical world, in the internal, emotional, psychological world, everything arises due to a cause. I called my website Causes of Wellbeing because that concept is so central to the way that I think about things. So then the question becomes, to what extent do we have agency over what produces a sense of well-being in our lives? And to what degree do we have agency over the kind of suffering that we experience? And it's pretty important to get clear on that. And this is one of the ways that Buddhism is so powerful. Because Buddhism acknowledges up front that there is a certain measure of suffering that is not negotiable to us. We age, we get sick, people die, we don't get everything we want, we're subject to loss and disappointment, and people leave, and all of that sort of stuff. All of that is not negotiable. How we relate to it, what we do in response to it, is negotiable. It becomes part of the agency that we gain under a Buddhist understanding of how life actually works. And then there are all these ways that we become sort of unconscious to the conditions that we have agency over that produce a sense of happiness and well-being and safety and connection and all the good things that we want to experience in life. So that's the idea of causality, that everything that we can experience, including well-being, including sobriety, sustained abstinence, arises due to a set of causes, and we should probably figure out what those causes are. So, back to the idea of conditionality in this teaching. I'm only going to focus on a sort of part of that teaching, but it begins with an acknowledgement that we are beings living in a physical form imbued with awareness. So we have these physical bodies and we have awareness. I'm aware of my hands moving in front of me. You're aware of me speaking. I'm aware of my surroundings, that out the window there's a truck going by. We are physical beings with awareness. And part of our physical form includes this capacity for receiving sensory information. We hear things, we see things, we taste things, we experience sensations on our bodies, all of the sort of senses that we all know about are part of the physical experience of being in the world in a body with sensory capacities. And through those sensory capacities, we make contact with the world. So I see the trees, I can touch my cats, we have pleasurable experiences and painful experiences. Okay, I just jumped ahead a little bit. So let's review. We are physical beings imbued with awareness, making contact to the world through our sensory capacities of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, sensation. Okay? Every time we have contact with the outside world, we experience whatever we contact, whatever we hear, whatever we see, as either pleasant or unpleasant, or we're sort of indifferent to it. There's actually too many things to be aware of for that everything could possibly draw my attention. But I want to focus on this dynamic of pleasant and unpleasant, because it really is central to all the rest of the Buddhist teachings. Excuse me, I'm getting over the flu. The sense of pleasant, the way that we experience things as either pleasant or unpleasant informs a whole chain of events that really leads to inform how we experience ourselves in the future, or actually even in the present. Because what I am experiencing right now, how much I've slept, what my relationships are like, what I've eaten, all of the things. The music I listened to this morning, I was listening to some jazz. It made me feel good. Those are all conditions that contribute to a sense of either more well-being or its opposite, more suffering. So the whole chain of events, and that chain of events unfolds like this. Where awareness is physical form, making contact, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling. And everything that we experience is registering as pleasant, unpleasant, or we're indifferent. And pleasant and unpleasant experiences condition the arising of fairly predictable mind states in a human being. So human beings have an aversion to pain, have an aversion to the unpleasant, and we grasp at and want to experience and maintain pleasant experiences. So arising out of that contact, pleasant, unpleasant, is our mind states of basically liking and disliking things. And from there, we often develop intentions, like motivation and intention to act or to speak. Or we go into a story or something like that. And those intentions then turn into action. And action brings results. This is the idea of karma in Buddhism. Simply that our actions, informed by our intentions, bring results. And those results are either we're more happy and experience more well-being, or we're the opposite. We're less happy, more paranoid, more disconnected, more angry, whatever, right? And that and now here we are we're at the end of the chain of events, results. This is one of the ways to understand the addiction. I mean, in its extreme, this is how addiction works. We're experiencing something. We're liking or disliking what we're experiencing. Our mind goes into aversive or aversion or grasping. We form intentions. I want to smoke the pot. I want to go get laid. I want to eat the sugar. I want to do whatever. Those intentions turn into action. Action brings consequences or results. So what's interesting is if you understand and you can, through objective awareness, through mindfulness, pay attention to the unfolding of those steps in your experience, you can wake up and intercede in any part of that process. Now, it is my experience that sometimes addiction is about imagining a more pleasurable state, that you just simply want to, I'd rather be high on sugar, I'd rather be high, I'd rather be drunk. And that's a fun thing for a while. If you're like me, that plays itself out over a number of years and you realize that that's no longer working for you. And the cost-benefit analysis swings too much into cost and not enough into benefit and pleasure. And so then we're presented with a choice point. And we decide, okay, well, I'm not going to do that thing anymore. That doesn't mean that you don't imagine doing it. And it certainly doesn't mean that when things get hard, when you get triggered, when you are dysregulated, when you are managing something hard, that difficulty doesn't also, because of the aversive orientation of the mind to pain, that we don't also start then seeking out how we can numb ourselves from the discomfort and pain that we're experiencing. That, in my experience, is mostly how people stay addicted and why they relapse. People don't generally relapse because they're sitting around feeling okay and they just decide they just have a kind of decide that they want to do the pleasurable thing. I think that happens sometimes. I think mostly it's the grinding anxiety, panic attacks, the depression, the edginess, the dysregulation of the system that I believe is almost always associated with trauma, a highly misunderstood and underappreciated variable in addiction, but that's for another video. That's when we get into the danger zone, where we go and do something that we understand will numb us for the short term, but ultimately compound our suffering. And so it is important for us to be able to see that chain of events. I'm experiencing something unpleasant. My mind goes into an aversive state of wanting to push it away. That aversion becomes an intention. We start to seek a way out. That intention informs action. That action brings results. Short-term relief, compounding of suffering later, and then a deepening of the whole, right? That's the addictive pattern. Through mindfulness, we can interject at any point in that process and consciously decide not to be unconscious and impulsive and reactive, but to respond in a way that supports more well-being for ourselves and others. That is a critical key thing to understand, that you can step in. The example I gave in one of my articles this week on my website is, imagine that you're a person who's going through a breakup, and you're also a person who, has quit sugar for health reasons because it makes you feel hungover, it makes you feel depressed. There's a lot of people out there, I happen to be one of them. When I eat sugar, my body just, it's not good. I feel hungover the next day, and I should probably never eat it. So you're depressed, you're lonely, you're angry, you're going through the breakup, and you find yourself imagining ice cream. And it's at Target, it's just 0.5 miles away. And you could pick up the gluten-free Oreos too if you wanted to go there. And so that intention, carries you to putting on your shoes, and you put on your little jacket, and you walk out to your car, and you start your car, and you start driving. So now you're in the action part of the experience, right? That chain of events. And then you kind of wake up and you go, oh shit, I'm about to do a thing that I don't want to do because I understand that it brings short-term relief but then compounds my suffering. It doesn't actually work. So there's two questions you can ask yourself as a kind of very simplified mindfulness practice. One, you can say, what's happening here? Oh, well, I'm going through it with a breakup. I'm sad. I'm all the things. And my pattern, my impulse, the one that I'm following right now, almost unconsciously, except it's not unconscious now, that I've asked myself what's happening, and I'm about to go do a thing that's not going to support me to feel actually better, a thing that doesn't work. So the second question you can ask yourself is, how can I respond to this situation in a way that would support my well-being? And so you think, well, why don't I call a friend and download? And why don't I go home and make a meal that would fortify me and make me feel better the next day? And so you take a right instead of a left, and you start your way back home, and you don't buy the ice cream or the Oreos, and you call your friend and you talk for a while and you feel better, and you cook for yourself, and you go to bed early, and you wake up in the morning and you're not hungover, and you've interrupted that entire unconscious cycle of impulsively following the prompts of not liking something, those feelings. And that is how, over and over again, you interrupt that addictive cycle. And this is one of the ways that Buddhism is so powerful in helping a person maintain sobriety. I maintained sobriety for 10 years probably, I think eight or 9 years before I even understood the role that trauma played, which became a very central focus of my own recovery and healing. It's very powerful. It really helps you maintain abstinence. So this video is becoming a long video. I'm going to stop there. Let me just review backwards, because this is kind of interesting, right? Whatever you're sitting with now, right now, is in part a result of what you have thought, said, and done. So your actions have brought results. Your actions were preceded and informed by intention. Your intentions arose from mind states of aversion or grasping, which arose out of a sense of liking and disliking things as a person in a physical form, making contact with the world and experiencing things, and experiencing them as pleasant and unpleasant. And anywhere in that chain of events, you can interrupt the cycle. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, my name is Pablo. My website is Causes of Wellbeing. I'd love to hear from you. I'll see you next time.